Chapter 12 of Inspector French and the Cheyne Mystery by Freeman Wills Crofts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Atul Sharma, Winnipeg, Canada. In the Enemy's Lair. With some difficulty, Cheyne overcame a sudden urge to leap at his companion's throat. "You infernal scoundrel," he cried thickly. "Injure a hair of Miss Merrill's head and you and your confounded friends will hang. I'll go to Scotland Yard. Do you think I mind about myself?" Dangle gave a cheery smile. "Right, Mr. Cheyne," he answered briskly. "By all means. Just do go to Scotland Yard and make your complaint. And what are you going to tell them? That Miss Merrill is in the hands of a dangerous gang of ruffians and must be rescued immediately? And the present address of this gang is—" He looked quizzically at the other. "I don't think so. I'm afraid Scotland Yard would be too slow for you. You see, my friends are waiting for a telephone message from me. If that is not received, or if it is unsatisfactory, well, don't let us discuss unpleasant topics, but Miss Merrill will be very, very sorry." Cheyne choked with rage, but for the moment he found himself unable to reply. That he was being bluffed he had no doubt, and in any other circumstances he would have taken a stronger line. But where Joan Merrill was concerned, he could run no risks. It was evident that she really was in the power of the gang. Dangle could not possibly have known about the throwing of the tracing over the wall, unless he really had found her as he had described. A very short cogitation convinced Cheyne that these people had them in their toils. Application to Scotland Yard would be useless. No doubt the police could find the conspirators, but they could not find them in time. So far as retaliation or a constructive policy was concerned, he saw that he was down and out. His thoughts turned to the proposal Dangle had made him. It was certainly fair. Too fair, he still thought. But if it was a genuine offer, he need have no qualms about accepting it. Frau Schultz, Mrs. Price, Joan, and himself were all promised shares of the profits. A clause could be put in covering Price, if he afterwards turned out to be alive. The gang might be a crowd of sharpers and thieves, so at least the melancholy Speedwell had said. But as Cheyne came to look at it, they had not really broken the law to a much greater extent than he had himself. His case to the authorities, suppose he were to lay it before them, would not be so overwhelmingly clear. Something could be said for, or rather against, both sides. If he had to give way, he might as well give way with good grace. He therefore choked down his rage and, turning to Dangle, said quietly, "I see you've won this trick. I'll accept your offer and go with you." Dangle, evidently delighted, sprang to his feet. "Splendid, Mr. Cheyne," he cried warmly, holding out his hand. "Shake hands, won't you? You'll not repent your action, I promise you." But this was too much for Cheyne. "No," he declared, "not yet. You haven't satisfied me of your bona fides. I'm sorry, but you have only yourselves to thank. When I find Miss Merrill at liberty and see Schultz's cipher, I'll be satisfied, and then I will join with you and give you all the help I can." Dangle seemed rather dashed, but he laughed shortly as he answered, "I suppose we deserve that after all. But you will soon be convinced. There is just a formality to be gone through before we start. Though you may not believe my word, we believe yours. And we have agreed that all that we want before taking you further into our confidence is that you swear an oath of loyalty to us. You won't object to that, I presume." Cheyne hesitated. Then he said, "I swear on my sacred honor that I will loyally abide by the spirit of the agreement which you have outlined, in so far as you and your friends act loyally to me and to Miss Merrill, and to that extent only." "That's reasonable and good enough," Dangle commented. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll go and phone to the others. You will understand," he explained on his return, "that my friends are some distance away from Wembley, and it will therefore take them a little time to get in. If they start now, They will be there as soon as we are." It was getting towards 10 o'clock when Cheyne and Dangle turned into the gateway of Earlswood. A yellow car stood at the footpath, at sight of which Dangle exclaimed, "See, they've arrived." His ring brought Blessington to the door, and the latter greeted Cheyne apologetically, but with the same charm of manner that he had displayed in the Edgecombe Hotel at Plymouth. "I do hope, Mr. Cheyne," he declared, "that even after all that has passed, we may yet be friends. We admire the way you have fought your corner, and we feel that what we both up to the present have failed to do may well be accomplished if we unite our forces. Come in and see if you can make friends with Syme." "I came to see Miss Merrill," Cheyne answered shortly. "If Miss Merrill is not produced and allowed to go without restraint, our agreement is non est." "Naturally," Blessington returned smoothly. "We understand that that is a sine qua non, and so Miss Merrill will be produced. She is not here. She is at our house in the country, in charge of Miss Dangle, and that for 2 reasons. The first is this. She met with, as doubtless you know, a trifling accident last night, and her ankle being a little painful, she was kept awake for some time. This morning when we left, she was still asleep. We did not, therefore, disturb her. That you will appreciate, Mr. Cheyne, and the other reason you will appreciate equally. We had to satisfy ourselves by a personal interview that you really meant to give us a square deal." He raised his hand as Cheyne would have spoken. "There's nothing in that to which you need take exception. It is an ordinary business precaution, nothing more or less." "And when will Miss Merrill be set at liberty?" "While I don't admit the justice of the phrase, I may say that as soon as we have all mutually pledged ourselves to play the game, I will take the car back to the other house, and when Miss Merrill has taken the same oath, will drive her to her studio. Perhaps you would write her a note that you have sworn it, as she mightn't believe me. There are a few preliminaries to be arranged, which Dangle and Syme can fix up with you. If you are at the studio at midday, you will be in time to welcome Miss Merrill." This did not meet with Cheyne's approval. He wished to go himself to the mysterious house with Blessington, but the latter politely but firmly conveyed to him that he had not yet irrevocably committed himself on their side, and until he had done so, they could not give away their best chance of escape should the police become interested in their movements. Cheyne argued with some bitterness, but the other side held the trumps, and he was obliged to give way. This point settled, nothing could have exceeded the easy friendliness of the trio. If Arnold Price were alive, he would share equally with the rest. Would Mr. Cheyne come to the study while the formalities were got through? Did he consider this oath, typewritten, would meet the case? Well, they would take it first, binding themselves individually to each other and to him. Each of the 3 swore loyalty to the remaining quintet, the oaths of Joan Merrill and Susan being assumed for the moment. Then Cheyne swore, and they all solemnly shook hands. "Now that's done, Mr. Cheyne, we'll prove our confidence in you by showing you the cipher. But first perhaps you would write to Miss Merrill. Also, if any point is not quite clear to you, please do not hesitate to question us." Cheyne was by no means enamored of the way things had turned out. He had been forced into an association with men with whom he had little in common and whom he did not trust. Had it not been for the trump card they held in the person of Joan Merrill, nothing would have induced him to throw in his lot with them. But now, contingent on their good faith to him, he had pledged his word, and though he was not sure how far an enforced pledge was binding, he felt that as long as they kept their part of the bargain, he must keep his. He therefore wrote his letter, and then turning to Blessington, answered him civilly. "There is one thing I should like to know. I have thought about it many times. How did you drug me in the hotel in Plymouth, without my knowledge, and without leaving any traces in the food?" Blessington smiled. "I'll tell you that with pleasure, Mr. Cheyne," he answered readily, "but I confess I am surprised that a man of your acumen was puzzled by it. It depended upon prearrangement, and given that, was perfectly simple. I provided myself with the drug. If you don't mind, I won't say how, as I might get someone else into trouble, but I got a small vial of it. I also took 2 other small bottles, one full of clean water, the other empty, together with a small cloth. Also, I took my extra special flask. Syme, like a good fellow, get my flask out of the drawer of my wrecked escritoire." He smiled ruefully at Cheyne. "Then I prepared for our lunch, the private room, the menu, and all complete. I told them at the hotel we had some business to arrange, and that we didn't want to be disturbed after lunch. You know, of course, that I got all details of your movements from Miss Dangle." "Yes, I understand that." As Cheyne spoke, Syme re-entered the room, putting down on the table the flask which had figured in the scene at the hotel. Blessington handed it to Cheyne. "Examine that flask, Mr. Cheyne," he invited. "Do you see anything remarkable about it?" It seemed an ordinary silver pocket flask, square and flat, and with a screw-down silver stopper. It was chased on both sides with a plain but rather pleasing design, and the base was flat so that it would stand securely. But Cheyne could see nothing about it in any way unusual. "Open it," Blessington suggested. Cheyne unscrewed the stopper and looked down the neck, but except that there was a curious projection at one side, which reduced the passage down to half the usual size, it seemed as other flasks. Blessington laughed. "Look here," he said, and seizing a scrap of paper, he drew the 2 sketches which I reproduce. "The flask is divided down the middle by a diaphragm C, so as to form 2 chambers, A and B. In these chambers are put 2 liquids, of which one is drugged and the other isn't. E and F are 2 half diaphragms, and D is a very light and delicately fitted flap valve, which will close the passage to either chamber. When you invert the flask, the liquid in the upper, or B chamber, runs out along diaphragm C, and its weight turns over valve D so that the passage to A chamber is closed. The liquid from B then pours out in the ordinary way. The liquid in A, however, cannot escape because it is caught by the diaphragm F. If you want to pour out the liquid from A, you simply turn the flask upside down when the conditions as to the 2 liquids are reversed. You probably didn't notice that I used the flask in this way at our lunch. You may remember that I poured out your liqueur first. It was drugged, of course. Then I got a convenient fit of coughing. That gave me an excuse to set down the flask and pick it up again. But when I picked it up, I was careful to do so by the other side, so that undrugged liqueur poured into my own cup. I drank my coffee at once to reassure you. Simple, wasn't it?" "More than simple," Cheyne answered with unwilling admiration in his tone. "A dangerous toy, but I admit deuced ingenious. But I don't follow even yet. That would have left the drug remains in the cup." "Quite so. But you have forgotten my other 2 bottles and my cloth. I poured the dregs from your cup into the empty bottle, washed the cup with water from the other, wiped it with my cloth, poured out another cup of coffee and drank it, leaving harmless grounds for any inquisitive analyst to experiment with." "By Jove," said Cheyne, then adding regretfully, "if we had only tried the handle of the cup for fingerprints." "I put gloves on after you went over." Cheyne smiled. "You deserved to succeed," he admitted ruefully. "I succeeded in drugging you," Blessington answered, "but I did not succeed in getting what I wanted. Now, Mr. Cheyne, you would like to see the tracing. Show it to him, Dangle, while I go back to the other house for Miss Merrill." Dangle left the room. returning presently with the blue-gray sheet which had been the pivot upon which all the strange adventures of the little company had turned. Cheyne saw at a glance it was the tracing which he had secured in the upper room in the house in Hopefield Avenue. There in the corners were the holes made by the drawing pins which had fixed it to the door while it was being photographed. There were the irregularly spaced circles with their letters and numbers, and there, written clockwise in a large circle, the words, "England expects every man to do his duty." Cheyne gazed at it with interest, while Dangle and Syme sat watching him. What on earth could it mean? He pondered a while, then turned to his companions. "Have you not been able to read any of it?" he queried. Dangle shook his head. "Not so much as a single word, not a letter even," he declared. "I tell you, Mr. Cheyne, it's a regular sneezer. I wouldn't like to say how many hours we spent, all of us, working at it. And I don't think there's a book on ciphers in the whole of London that we haven't read. And not a glimmer of light from any of them. Blessington had a theory that each of these circles was intended to represent one or more atoms, according to the number it contained, and that certain circles could be grouped to make molecules of the various substances that were to be mixed with the copper. I never could quite understand his idea, but in any case, all our work hasn't helped us to find them. The truth is that we're stale. We want a fresh brain on it, and particularly a woman's brain. Sometimes a woman's intuition will lead her to a lucky guess. We hope it may in this case." He paused, then went on again. "Another thing we tried was this. Suppose that by some system of numerical substitution, each of these numbers represents a letter. Then groups of these letters together with the letters already in the circles should represent words. Of course, it is difficult to group them, though we tried again and again. At first the idea seemed promising, but we could make nothing of it. We couldn't find any system, either of substitution or of grouping, which would give a glimmering of sense. No, we're up against it, and no mistake, and when we think of the issues involved, we go nearly mad from exasperation. Take the thing, Mr. Cheyne, and see what you and Miss Merrill can do. That is the original, but I have made a tracing of it, so that we can continue our work simultaneously." Cheyne felt himself extraordinarily thrilled by this recital, and the more he examined the mysterious markings on the sheet, the more interested he grew. He had always had a penchant for puzzles, and ciphers appealed to him as being perhaps the most alluring kind of puzzles extant. Particularly did this cipher attract him, because of the circumstances under which it had been brought to his notice. He longed to get to grips with it, and he looked forward with keen delight to a long afternoon and evening over it with Joan Merrill, whose interest in it would, he felt sure, be no whit less than his own. Certainly, he thought, his former enemies had made a good beginning. So far they were playing the game, and he began to wonder if he had not to some extent misjudged them, and if the evil characters given them by the gloomy Speedwell were not tinged by that despondent individual's jaundiced outlook on life in general. Dangle had left the room, and he now returned with a bottle of whiskey and a box of cigars. "A drink and a cigar to cement our alliance, Mr. Cheyne," he proposed, "and then I think our business will be done." Cheyne hesitated, while a vision of the private room in the Edgecombe Hotel rose in his memory. Dangle read his thoughts, for he smiled and went on. "I see you don't quite trust us yet, and I don't know that I can blame you. But we really are all right this time. Examine these tumblers and then pour out the stuff yourself, and we'll drink ours first. We must get you convinced of our goodwill." Cheyne hesitated, but Dangle insisting, he demonstrated to his satisfaction that his companions drank the same mixture as himself. Then Dangle opened the cigar box. "These are specially good, though I say it myself. The box was given to Blessington by a rich West Indian planter. We only smoked them on state occasions, such as the present, Won't you take one?" Cheyne felt it would be churlish to refuse, and soon the three were puffing such tobacco as Cheyne, at all events, had seldom before smoked. Syme then excused himself, explaining that though business might be neglected, it could not be entirely ignored, and Cheyne, thereupon taking the hint, said that he too must be off. "Tomorrow we shall be kept late in town," Dangle explained as they stood on the doorstep, "but the next evening we shall be here. Will you and Miss Merrill come down and report progress, and let us have a council of war?" Cheyne agreed and was turning away when Dangle made a sudden gesture. "By George, I was forgetting," he cried. "Wait a second, Mr. Cheyne." He disappeared back into the house, returning a moment later with a small purse, which he handed to Cheyne. "Do you happen to know if that is Miss Merrill's?" he inquired. "It was found beside the chair in which we placed her last night, when we carried her in." Cheyne recognized the article at once. He had frequently seen Joan use it. "Yes, it's hers," he answered, to which Dangle replied, asking if he would take it for her. Cheyne slipped the purse into his pocket, and next moment he was walking along Dalton Road towards the station, free, well, and with the tracing in his pocket. Until that moment, in the inner recesses of his consciousness, doubt of the bona fides of the trio had lingered. Until then, the fear that he was to be the victim of some plausible trick had dwelt in his heart. But now at last he was convinced. Had the men desired to harm him, they had had a perfect opportunity. He had been for the last hour entirely in their power. No one knew where he had gone, and they could with the greatest ease have murdered him, and either hidden his body about the house or garden, or removed it in the car during the night. Yes, this time he believed their story. It was eminently reasonable, and as a matter of fact, it had been pretty well proved by their actions, as well as by the facts that he had learned at the Admiralty and elsewhere. They were at a standstill, because they couldn't read the cipher, and they really did want, as they said, the help of his and Joan's fresh brains. From their point of view, they had done a wise thing in thus approaching him. Indeed, a masterly thing. Cheyne was not conceited, and he did not consider his own mental powers phenomenal, but he knew he was good at puzzles, and at the very least, he and Joan were of average intelligence. Moreover, they were the only other persons who knew of the cipher, and it was the soundest strategy to turn their antagonism into cooperation. He reached North Wembley to find a train about to start for town, and some half-hour later he was walking up the platform at Euston. He looked at his watch. It was barely 11. An hour would elapse before Joan would reach her rooms, and that meant that he had more than half an hour to while away before going to meet her. It occurred to him that in his excitement he had forgotten to breakfast, and though he was not hungry, he thought another cup of coffee would not be unacceptable. Moreover, he could at the same time have a look over the cipher. He therefore went to the refreshment room, gave his order, and sat down at a table in a secluded corner. Then, drawing the mysterious sheet from his pocket, he began to examine it. As he leaned forward over his coffee, he felt Joan's purse in his pocket, and suddenly fearful lest in his eagerness to tell her his experiences he should forget to give it to her, he took it out and laid it on the table, intending to carry it in his hand until he met her. Then he returned to his study of the tracing. There are those who tell us that in this world there are no trifles, that every event, however unimportant it may appear, is preordained and weighty as every other. On this bright spring morning in the first-class refreshment room at Euston, Cheyne was to meet with a demonstration of the truth of this assertion, which left him marveling and humbly thankful. For there took place what seemed to be a trifling thing, and yet that trifle proved to be the most important event that had ever taken place, or was to take place, in his life. When he took his first sip of coffee, he found that he had forgotten to put sugar in it, and when he looked at the sugar bowl, he saw that by the merest chance it was empty. An empty sugar bowl, a trifle that, if ever there was one, and yet nothing of more supreme moment had ever happened to Cheyne than the finding of that empty bowl on his table at that moment. The sugar bowl, then, being empty, he picked it up with his free hand and carried it across to the counter to ask the barmaid to fill it. Scarcely had he done so when there came from behind him an appalling explosion. There was a reverberating crash mingled with the tinkle of falling glass, while a sharp blast of air swept past him, laden with the pungent smell of some burned chemical. He wheeled round, the shrill screams of the barmaids in his ears, to see the corner of the room where he had been sitting, in complete wreckage. Through a fog of smoke and dust he saw that his table and chair were non-existent. Neighboring tables and chairs were overturned. The window was gone. Hat racks, pictures, wall advertisements were heaped in broken and torn confusion, while over all was spread a coat of plaster which had been torn from the wall. On the floor lay a man who had been seated at an adjoining table, the only other occupant of that part of the room. For a moment no one moved, and then there came a rush of feet from without, and a number of persons burst into the room. Porters, ticket collectors, a guard, and several members of the public came crowding in, staring with round eyes and open mouths at the debris. Eager hands helped to raise the prostrate man, who appeared to be more or less seriously injured, while hurried questions were bandied from lip to lip. It did not need the barmaid's half-hysterical cry, "Why, it was your purse! I saw it go!" to make clear to Cheyne what had happened. And as he grasped the situation, his heart melted within him, and a great fear took possession of his mind. Once again, these dastardly scoundrels had hoaxed him. Their oaths, their protestations of friendship, their talk of an alliance, all were a sham. They were out to murder him. The purse they had evidently stolen from Joan, filling it with explosives, with some time agent, probably chemical, to make it go off at the proper moment. They had given it to him under conditions which made it a practical certainty that at that moment it would be in his pocket, when he would be blown to pieces without leaving any clue as to the agency which had wrought his destruction. He suddenly felt sick as he thought of the whole hideous business. But it was not contemplation of the fate he had so narrowly escaped that sent his heart leaping into his throat in deadly panic. If these unspeakable ruffians had tried to murder him with their hellish explosives, what about Joan Merrill? All the talk about driving her back to her rooms must have been mere eyewash. She must be in deadly peril. If it was not too late, if she was not already, merciful heaven, he could not frame the thought. If she was not already dead. He burst into a cold sweat as the idea burned itself into his consciousness. And then suddenly he knew the reason. He loved her. He loved this girl who had saved his life and who had already proved herself such a splendid comrade and helpmeet. His own life, the wretched secret, the miserable pursuit of wealth, victory over the gang, what were these worth? They were forgotten. They were nothing. They were less than nothing. It was Joan and Joan's safety that filled his mind. "Oh God," he murmured in an agony, "save her, save her. No matter about anything else, only save her." He stood, leaning against the counter, overcome with these thoughts. Then the need for immediate action brought him to his senses. Perhaps it was not too late. Perhaps something might yet be done. Scotland Yard, that was his only hope. Instantly he must go to Scotland Yard and implore the help of the authorities. He glanced round. Persons in authority were entering and pushing to the front of the now dense crowd. That surely was the station master, and there was a policeman. Cheyne did not want to be detained to answer questions. He slipped rapidly into the throng, and by making way for those behind to press forward, soon found himself on its outskirts. In a few seconds, he was on the platform, and in a couple of minutes, he was in a taxi, driving towards Westminster, as fast as a promise of double fare could take him. He raced into the great building on the embankment, and rather incoherently stated his business. He was asked to sit down, and after waiting what seemed to him interminable ages, but what was really something under 5 minutes, he was told that Inspector French would see him. Would he please come this way? End of chapter 12.